Part 2. The Last Train to Nowhere. Alice stumbled out of the train and onto the platform, the cool, oppressive air hitting her skin like a slap. The strange red sky hung low above her, swirling with dark clouds that looked almost alive, like the sky was in motion, breathing. Her heart pounded as she glanced over her shoulder toward the train. The doors had already slammed shut, and the train, now a dark silhouette in the fog, began to pull away. The echo of the engine's whistle faded into the distance, leaving nothing but an eerie silence behind. The man, the one who had sat across from her on the train, was nowhere to be seen. The station was entirely empty, and for the first time, Alice noticed how still everything was. The air itself seemed to hang motionless, thick and heavy, almost like the atmosphere was holding its breath. The platform stretched ahead of her into an endless expanse of shadow. There was no sign of any town. No people, no life, just that oppressive silence and the unsettling feeling that something was watching her. Her feet shuffled against the cold concrete as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Her mind raced, trying to find logic in the impossible. She was sure she had been on a train, sure she had entered a station. But this place? This couldn't be real. The station around her was far older than it had looked from the inside of the train. The walls were covered in moss and vines, the paint peeling and faded. Rusted tracks ran into the darkness, disappearing into the unknown. There were no lights, no street lamps, nothing to guide her. And then she heard it, a low, almost imperceptible hum, coming from far down the platform. Alice's heart skipped a beat. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was something else, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. She turned her head toward the sound, her body tense, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The figure appeared again, at the far end of the platform, standing in the shadows. Tall, unmoving, its shape too distorted to be fully understood, its edges blurred, like a part of the darkness itself. The figure was human, or at least appeared to be, but there was something wrong with it. The longer Alice stared, the more it seemed to bend and warp, as if it were constantly shifting, twisting between realities. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew, somehow, that this figure was not just another person. It was something else. Something that belonged to this place, this twisted version of reality that she was trapped in. Without thinking, Alice began to walk toward the figure. Her legs moved of their own accord, each step carrying her closer to the source of the strange hum. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, its dark silhouette growing more defined with each passing second. She could feel her pulse quickening, a cold sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. It was so close now, she could almost reach out and touch it. Just as she was about to call out, the figure tilted its head. A slow, deliberate motion that sent a jolt of terror through her chest. And then its eyes opened. They were dark, empty holes where there should have been irises or pupils. There was nothing there, just a deep, infinite void. Yet, Alice felt as if it were staring directly into her soul. A deep, suffocating presence filled her mind, pressing against the walls of her thoughts, as though something ancient and malevolent was trying to force its way inside her. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered, not from the figure's mouth, but from everywhere at once. It was cold, distant, and impossibly old. Alice's body froze, her feet unwilling to move, her mind gripped in terror. "You are not supposed to be here," the voice repeated, its tone now laced with malice. "None of you are." The ground beneath her feet trembled. The figure's eyes flared, and for a brief moment, Alice could swear she saw a reflection of something. Something dark and monstrous in those black depths. The train, the station, everything around her seemed to blur and distort, like the very fabric of reality was tearing at the seams. "No," Alice whispered, trying to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed by fear. The figure took a step forward. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as a frost crept along the concrete. Alice could see her breath, frozen in the air, thickening into clouds of mist. But the chill didn't come from the environment. It came from inside her, seeping into her bones, freezing her very soul. "You're already too far gone," the voice murmured again, this time softer, like a dark lullaby. "There is no way out. You boarded the train, Alice. Now it's too late." Alice's mind raced. There had to be a way out. She had to fight it. Fight whatever this thing was, this nightmare. But her body wouldn't respond. She felt like she was sinking into the ground, her thoughts spiraling deeper and deeper into an abyss. The shadows around her grew longer, stretching, distorting, like tendrils reaching out from the darkness itself. The figure's mouth opened, and this time, Alice could hear the words clearly, inside her head. "You belong to the train now, Alice. You are one of us." The ground shook violently, and the sound of a distant train whistle echoed through the air, distant yet close, as though it was moving right behind her, just out of sight. Alice's vision blurred as the world around her began to fragment. Pieces of the platform cracked and splintered, collapsing into the void. In a desperate burst of adrenaline, Alice managed to tear her eyes away from the figure. She turned, looking for an escape, but there was nothing but endless, shifting shadows and the sound of the train approaching. The hum grew louder, vibrating through her skull. She couldn't stay here. She had to leave. Without a second thought, she ran. Her legs moved faster than she thought possible, carrying her down the platform toward the dark, open train doors. The train was nearly upon her now, its headlights cutting through the mist like a pair of hungry eyes. She could hear the screeching of metal as the doors opened, the same mechanical hiss that had welcomed her onto the train before. Alice didn't stop to think. She dove inside, just as the train began to move again. The doors slammed shut behind her, and the train lurched forward, taking her deeper into the unknown. The figure stood at the end of the platform, watching her, its empty eyes following her every movement. The train picked up speed, the sound of the engine's whistle echoing like a final warning. Alice sank into a seat, trembling. Her heart was racing, and her body was frozen with fear. The air inside the train felt colder now, and she could feel that same presence pressing in on her, suffocating her thoughts. The train was no longer just a train. It was something else, something that was taking her somewhere far worse than she could ever imagine. And she was running out of time. Part 3, the last train to nowhere. The train rumbled on, its rhythmic thrum lulling Alice into a dazed, half-conscious state. Her mind was foggy, clouded with terror, and she could feel herself slowly sinking into the seat. She tried to focus, tried to steady her breath, but it was no use. The fear clung to her, a weight in her chest that wouldn't let go. Every part of her screamed to wake up, to break free from the grip of this nightmare. But the more she tried, the more she felt herself slipping. The doors of the train car clicked shut with a hollow, final sound, the harsh screech of metal grinding against metal reverberating through her skull. There was no escaping now, not anymore. The train had already left the station, and there was nowhere to go but forward, deeper into the unknown. Alice closed her eyes, trying to shut out the creeping darkness that was steadily consuming her. She gripped the edges of the seat, her fingers digging into the fabric as though it could anchor her to reality. She could hear the hum of the train beneath her, the hiss of the brakes, and the distant echo of footsteps, though there was no one else on board. The train's interior was unsettlingly quiet, save for the occasional creaking of the overhead lights and the soft rattle of the tracks beneath. The windows were covered with thick black curtains that blocked out any light from the outside, leaving her in complete darkness. Alice didn't dare look out the window, not after what she had seen before. She wasn't sure if the world outside was still the same, or if it had become something else entirely, some twisted reflection of reality that she couldn't comprehend. A sudden shiver ran down her spine, and she opened her eyes, her pulse quickening. There, across the aisle, in the dim, flickering light, stood the same figure. The man, the one from earlier. He was standing motionless, his face partially obscured by shadow, but there was no mistaking the chilling aura that radiated from him. His dark, empty eyes were locked on her, and his lips curled into that same unsettling, knowing smile. For a moment, Alice couldn't breathe. Her heart thudded violently against her ribcage, and her hands shook uncontrollably. She opened her mouth to scream, to demand answers, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared, his presence suffocating the air around her. "You've seen it, haven't you?" His voice was a rasp, low and haunting, but there was a strange softness to it, as if he were trying to soothe her. The truth of this place. Alice's throat tightened, and she forced herself to speak, her voice hoarse and trembling. "What is this? Where am I? Why are you doing this to me?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words, before stepping forward. The train lurched beneath them, throwing Alice off balance, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw the man's shadow stretch unnaturally long, stretching across the floor of the car like a living thing. "You chose this, Alice," he said softly, his words wrapping around her like chains. "You boarded the train, and now you're a part of it. A part of the journey." "The journey?" Alice gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I didn't choose anything. I was just trying to get home." The man's smile grew wider, but there was no warmth in it. "There is no home, not here, not on this train. You are far beyond where you started now." Alice's heart skipped a beat. She tried to push herself back against the seat, to escape the suffocating presence of the man. But the more she moved, the more the train seemed to twist around her. The walls stretched, the seats bent and distorted, the very fabric of reality rippling like water. "No!" Alice gasped, her voice breaking. "I don't understand. Why am I here? Why me?" The man's figure wavered for a moment, his body distorting as if he were made of smoke, flickering in and out of focus. His eyes remained fixed on her, a deep, endless void that seemed to pull at her very soul. "Because you're lost, Alice," he said, his voice now cold and detached. "Just like the others who come aboard. You were lost before you even stepped on this train. The train knows that. It finds you." The air inside the car grew colder, and Alice could feel a sharp, biting chill wrap around her body. She hugged herself, trying to steady her trembling hands. "What are you talking about? What's this train? Where is it going?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was standing right in front of her, his face inches from hers. His breath was ice-cold against her skin. "It's going to the end, Alice," he whispered, his voice full of dark satisfaction. "The end of everything." With that, he faded into the shadows once more, his form dissolving into the flickering darkness of the train car. Alice gasped, her hand reaching out to the spot where he had been standing, but there was nothing, only silence. The train seemed to slow. Alice could feel it, the gradual deceleration of the metal beast beneath her, the slow grinding of the wheels against the tracks. She looked around, her pulse quickening. The windows were still covered, the inside of the train dark and oppressive. But she could feel something, an unnatural shift, a change in the air, a new presence. The train stopped completely. Alice held her breath, listening. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it wasn't the same silence she had felt earlier. No, this was different. It was as if the train had stopped not by its own will, but because something had made it stop. Something was waiting for her. A sudden sound broke the silence. A low, creaking noise, like the sound of a door opening. Alice's head whipped toward the sound. At the far end of the car, the door that led into the next compartment slowly creaked open, the hinges groaning under the strain. A thin sliver of light spilled through the gap, and for a moment, Alice thought she saw something, someone, standing just beyond the door. She couldn't move. Her body was frozen, her mind racing. There was no more denying it. She was trapped, trapped on this train in this nightmare. And whatever was beyond that door, whatever awaited her on the other side, was something she could no longer avoid. The light from the next car flickered again, and Alice took a tentative step forward, her feet dragging against the cold floor. She didn't want to go, But she couldn't stay. She had no choice. With one last, shaky breath, she crossed the threshold. Part 4, the last train to nowhere. The door slammed shut behind Alice with a force that shook her to the core. The sudden jolt made her stumble, and she caught herself against the cold, steel wall of the next car. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her heart was thudding painfully in her chest as she tried to steady herself. The compartment she stepped into was eerily different from the one she had just left. The air was thick and heavy, saturated with the smell of decay and something else. Something metallic, almost like blood. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, and the faint glow of flickering, dim lights cast long, unsettling shadows across the floor. The seats were covered in dust, and the floor creaked beneath her feet as though it hadn't been walked on in years. Yet, as Alice took her first step into the compartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. She glanced around nervously, but the car was empty. There was no sign of any other passengers, no conductor, no familiar faces. Just an unsettling emptiness that hung in the air like a thick fog. And then she heard it, a low, guttural sound, barely a whisper, coming from the far end of the car. It wasn't human. It was more like the sound of an animal or something worse, something that didn't belong in this world. The noise grew louder, like claws scraping against metal, and Alice's heart stopped for a moment. It came from beyond the door at the other end of the car. Alice hesitated. She had to know what was making that noise, but at the same time, a primal instinct told her to run, to flee before whatever it was reached her. She took a step toward the door, her legs feeling heavy with dread. The air seemed to press down on her, making it harder to breathe with each passing second. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, the noise stopped. Alice froze, her breath caught in her throat. A silence so deep and profound filled the car. It was almost suffocating. But this silence wasn't comforting. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, unnatural, and it felt like something was about to break it. Something terrible. With a flicker, the lights overhead buzzed and dimmed. For a split second, Alice could have sworn she saw something. No, someone, in the reflection of the darkened window beside her. But when she turned her head to look, there was nothing. Only darkness. The silence stretched on, heavier now, as if the train itself was holding its breath. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Slow, deliberate, dragging, like something reluctant to move but forced to anyway. Alice's pulse quickened, and she gripped the door handle tightly, her fingers slick with sweat. She was no longer sure if she was ready to find out what lay beyond that door. But something in her gut told her that if she didn't face whatever was waiting, it would follow her, haunt her until the end of this journey. The door creaked open, and Alice stepped into the next car. The sight that met her eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't a normal train car. The walls were lined with mirrors, hundreds of mirrors, all cracked and splintered, reflecting not only her own terrified face but other faces. There were faces that weren't hers. Twisted, distorted faces with hollow eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. They seemed to shift and writhe, as though they were alive, trapped in the glass. They reached out, their fingers pressing against the mirrors as if trying to escape. But it wasn't the mirrors that terrified her most. It was the thing that stood at the center of the car. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood motionless in the middle of the compartment, surrounded by a circle of shattered mirrors. Its shape was indistinct, but Alice could feel its presence. The air grew colder, colder than before, and the figure seemed to draw the very warmth out of the room, leaving her frozen, shivering. For a moment, Alice couldn't move. She could barely breathe, her mind screaming for her to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. Her eyes locked on the figure, which had yet to make a sound, yet to move. It simply stood there, staring at her. But Alice didn't need it to move. She could feel it. It was waiting for her attention. Then, a voice, soft and raspy, like the whisper of wind through dry leaves, drifted into her ears. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You've come so far, Alice, but you haven't yet reached the end. You'll never reach the end." The words echoed in her mind, a taunting refrain that dug deep into her psyche. It was as though the voice knew her, knew everything about her. The deep, hidden fears she had never spoken aloud. Alice shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. No, this can't be happening. This isn't real. It's all just a dream." The figure's shape seemed to flicker, shifting in and out of focus. The shadows around it twisted and distorted, until they seemed to take on a life of their own, swirling like a storm. The mirrors began to rattle, the sound of glass scraping against metal like nails on a chalkboard. "It is real, Alice," the voice said again, now louder, more insistent. "It's all real. You've crossed the threshold, and now you belong to this place. There is no escape. You're already gone." Alice's legs finally moved, a jolt of adrenaline forcing her forward, but it wasn't enough. The figure's shadow seemed to stretch out toward her, pulling her back with an invisible force. She gasped, stumbling, her hands flying to her sides as if to push away the darkness that was closing in. But it was too late. The mirrors shattered, sending jagged shards of glass tumbling to the floor with a deafening crash. The sound echoed in her mind, reverberating through her skull, growing louder, until it drowned out everything else. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy, a storm building around her. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and the walls of the train car began to warp and distort, bending like they were made of paper. And then, with one final, terrifying scream, everything went black. Part 5, The Last Train to Nowhere. Alice's eyes shot open, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her body was drenched in cold sweat, and her heart was hammering in her chest like a wild animal trying to escape its cage. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she had truly woken up, or if she was still trapped in the nightmare. The air felt thick, suffocating, like it had been pressing down on her for an eternity. She looked around frantically, her surroundings hazy and indistinct. She was no longer in the mirror-filled train car. There were no shadows, no distorted figures, just a vast, empty space, stretching endlessly in all directions. The floor beneath her was smooth, metallic, and the walls shimmered with a dull, unnatural light, like a reflection of a world she no longer recognized. "Where am I?" The thought lingered in her mind, but it made no sense. She didn't understand. This place, it wasn't real. She had to wake up. She had to escape. Alice's legs wobbled as she stood, and she immediately felt the weight of the oppressive silence surrounding her. It was as if the world itself had stopped moving, waiting for something to happen, but nothing came. No footsteps, no whispers, no flickering lights, just the void. She forced herself to take a step forward, but the ground beneath her feet didn't feel like solid earth anymore. It was soft, malleable, like walking on an endless sea of sand that was constantly shifting beneath her. As she moved, the walls seemed to pulse in response, stretching and contracting like a living organism. "Where am I?" The thought echoed again, but this time it was different. It was as though the question was being asked by someone else, someone who had no answers, just the same confusion, the same sense of disorientation. Suddenly, the lights above her flickered, casting brief flashes of illumination across the dark expanse. And then, a low, almost inaudible hum began to fill the air, vibrating through the walls, through the floor beneath her. The sound was so faint at first, Alice thought it was her imagination, but it grew steadily louder, a deep, resonant pulse that reverberated in her bones. The walls, once smooth and unyielding, began to shift again, but this time it wasn't just an optical illusion. The metal walls warped and bent, pulling inward as if they were alive. The hum grew louder, filling her entire body, vibrating through her, making her feel like she was being consumed from the inside out. Without warning, the space around her began to twist. The air turned thick, dense, and the ground shifted beneath her as if it were no longer solid. She tried to take another step, but her feet slipped, and she tumbled to the floor. Her body slammed against the ground with a force that left her breathless. Before she could regain her bearings, the walls twisted and contorted further. The very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. The floor broke apart, and pieces of the ceiling cracked and splintered like glass, falling around her in jagged shards. Alice screamed, scrambling to her feet, but there was nowhere to run. The walls began to close in on her, collapsing inward with a deafening crash. She was trapped in a narrowing corridor, the darkness closing around her, suffocating her. And then, through the chaos, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. The man, the one she had seen in the train car. He stood motionless, his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak, his eyes glowing with an unsettling, unnatural light. His presence was all-encompassing, like the very air around her was being drawn into him. "You've come to the end, Alice," he said, his voice a low, almost melodic whisper, the words slipping into her mind like poison. "You've reached the point of no return." "No, no, please," Alice gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Her body trembled, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the walls inching closer, the entire world around her distorting. "You don't belong here," she heard him say again, his voice rising like a chant. "You don't belong in this place." The man's eyes burned with an unnatural fire. She tried to look away, but his gaze was magnetic, holding her captive. His smile twisted, and Alice could feel her pulse quicken, a sense of dread so deep it made her want to scream. "You were never meant to board the train, Alice," the man continued, his voice now echoing in her skull. "It wasn't just a ride. It was a journey to the edge of all things, to the edge of time, of space, of existence itself." The ground trembled again, and the walls around her seemed to buckle, pulling inward with an unnatural force. The train, the mirrors, the shadows, it was all part of it, part of whatever this place was. And it was all happening because of her. Alice's breath caught in her throat. What is this place? What do you want from me?" The man stepped forward, his form flickering in and out of focus, like a shadow caught in the light. His eyes never left her. "I don't want anything from you, Alice. I'm just the one who waits for those who have lost their way, those who have boarded the train." Her heart pounded in her chest. "The train?" she whispered, barely able to comprehend his words. "The train is the only way to reach the end." Alice's mind reeled, her thoughts swirling. "What end? What are you talking about?" "You've crossed the line, Alice," the man said softly, almost sympathetically. "This place was never meant for you, but now that you've stepped onto the train, you can never leave. Not until it's time. Not until your journey is finished." Alice's mind began to spin. Never leave? What does that mean? But before she could ask another question, the world around her began to crack. The air fractured like glass, and she felt herself being pulled in every direction. She screamed, but no sound came out. The man's figure grew larger, his face becoming clearer, more twisted. The darkness around her collapsed in on itself, and she was swallowed by it. The train was still moving, the wheels were still turning, and Alice was still on board. Part 6. The last train to nowhere. The darkness was absolute. Alice's senses were completely overwhelmed. The walls, the floor, the air itself, all of it was swallowed by the crushing void. She couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet, nor could she hear the sound of her own breathing. It was as if she had been suspended in nothingness, trapped in a world without form, a place where time itself had ceased to exist. Her heart raced in the eerie silence, but her mind was numb. She had no idea how long she had been there, or even if she had been there at all. The man's face, his words, the train, the mirrors, they all felt distant, like echoes of a life she no longer remembered. But then, like a flicker of light breaking through the darkness, a sound reached her ears. Faint at first, but growing louder, the sound of a train. Alice's eyes snapped open, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She wasn't in the void anymore. She was back in the train, sitting in one of the dimly lit compartments. The walls of the train car were peeling and cracked, the air thick with the scent of mildew and dust. She wasn't alone. The figure stood at the end of the car again, the man. But this time he wasn't as distant. He was right there, his presence overwhelming, his dark eyes burning through the shadows. His form was more solid now, more real, his features clear and sharp in the dim light. Alice's heart skipped a beat. She tried to move, to speak, but her limbs felt like lead, her throat constricting as if it were being choked by the air itself. Her eyes darted around the car, but there was no escape. The doors had vanished. The windows were blackened, obscured by thick layers of grime and soot. The train was moving again, but this time it felt different. The rattling of the wheels, the clanging of the tracks, it all felt like a distorted mockery of motion, as though the train itself was bending time, pulling her deeper into the void. The man stepped forward, his footsteps eerily quiet on the floor. His eyes never left hers. "You can't escape, Alice," he whispered, his voice soft yet piercing, like a blade cutting through her mind. "Not from this train. Not from me." "Why?" Alice gasped, her voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" The man tilted his head, his lips curling into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it, only an emptiness that sent a chill through her. He seemed to enjoy her confusion, the way she struggled against the weight of the impossible. "You've asked that question before, haven't you?" he said softly. "The why of it all. But you'll never understand. Not until the end. Until the journey is complete." Alice's breath quickened, her mind racing. The end? What was he talking about? She had to know, had to break free from this madness before it consumed her entirely. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I can't be stuck here. This can't be real. There has to be a way out." The man's smile widened, though his eyes remained cold, hollow. "This is real, Alice. This is the truth. You've already crossed the threshold. There's no going back." Alice's heart pounded in her chest as panic surged through her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand what was happening. The walls seemed to close in, the train car shrinking around her, pressing against her like a suffocating cage. "No, please," she gasped, her voice strained. "Please, I just want to leave. I just want to go home." The man's expression softened, but it wasn't compassion. No, it was something worse. Something empty. "There is no home," he said, his voice growing quieter, softer, like the final words of a long-forgotten lullaby. "You've lost your way, Alice. There is no place left to go. You've already boarded the last train, and the journey never ends." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating through every corner of her soul. The last train, the journey, it all felt so wrong, so twisted. She could feel herself unraveling, her sense of reality cracking under the pressure of it all. There was no escape, no way out. The lights above flickered and dimmed, casting the car into complete darkness. Alice's breath caught in her throat. The train slowed, the sounds of the wheels grinding to a halt. But there was no station ahead, no sign of life. The world outside was as empty as the car itself. And then, in the distance, Alice saw it. A door, a single door, standing at the far end of the car, bathed in a faint, otherworldly light. It was unlike any door she had seen before. Tall, imposing, and made of a material she couldn't recognize. A deep, obsidian black that seemed to absorb the very light around it. There was no handle, no way to open it, yet it beckoned to her with an unnatural force. Something inside her stirred. A feeling, deep within her gut, told her that the door was her last hope. It was the way out, or at least it might be. Without thinking, without another word, Alice bolted toward the door. She didn't look back at the man, didn't wait for him to stop her. She ran with every ounce of strength she had, her pulse pounding in her ears as the walls of the train car seemed to shift, stretch, and warp around her. When she reached the door, her hand shot out to grasp the handle, but it wasn't there. The door was smooth, unyielding, like the surface of a mirror. Desperation clawed at her insides, and her fingers scraped against the cold, black surface as she tried to pry it open. And then, in a final burst of energy, the door creaked, slowly opening on its own. Beyond it was not what she expected. It wasn't a station. It wasn't a world. It was nothing. A vast, empty void. A black expanse, stretching on forever. There were no stars, no light, no time. Just the infinite, endless dark. And standing in the middle of that void, a figure was waiting for her. It was the man, his eyes glowing brighter now, and this time, there was no hint of a smile. Only a look of pure, unrelenting darkness. His form stretched and shifted, twisting like a shadow, until it was no longer human at all, but a shape of pure terror. "You can't leave, Alice," the voice said, though it was no longer his voice. It was the sound of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all echoing her name. "You never really left." Alice screamed, but no sound came. The door slammed shut behind her. The void swallowed her whole. Alice stood frozen in the darkness, her breath caught in her throat. The world around her had dissolved into blackness, a deep, endless void that stretched as far as the eye could see. The door that had been her only hope was now nothing more than a distant memory, locked away behind her like the last shred of reality she had known. The man, the figure, was gone, but his presence lingered in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on her chest with an unbearable weight. His words echoed in her mind, vibrating through her skull. "You can't leave, Alice." Her eyes darted frantically around, but there was no sign of anything. No shape, no sound, no light. Just endless, oppressive darkness. An emptiness so complete it felt like her very soul was being sucked into it. It was as though she had been cast into the very fabric of oblivion, a place where nothing existed but the stillness. Alice's legs trembled beneath her, and her hands shook as she reached out, trying to grasp onto something, anything, but there was nothing to hold. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a deafening thud in the silence. She stumbled forward, her feet dragging through the nothingness as if the air itself was trying to hold her back, to pull her deeper into the abyss. Was she dead? Was this the end? The thought ran through her mind, fleeting and ungraspable. She had no way of knowing if she was still alive, if she was in some sort of dream, or if this was real. It was all too much to comprehend, too overwhelming. A low sound echoed from somewhere in the distance. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder with each passing second. A soft, rhythmic thrum that pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. Alice's breath quickened as she turned, desperately searching for the source of the noise. Her eyes strained to pierce the darkness, but all she could see was a faint, glowing light, barely visible against the black backdrop. It was coming closer. The sound grew more distinct, clearer. A mechanical hum, like the distant rumble of an engine starting. Slowly, impossibly, the darkness around her seemed to shift, to fade, and in its place, the faint outline of something appeared. A train. A faint glow of light danced across its surface, flickering like a dying star. It was like no train Alice had ever seen before. Sleek, smooth, dark as coal, its shape rippling like liquid, almost unreal, as though it were made of the very void itself. The train stopped in front of her, its headlights casting long shadows that stretched across the emptiness. The doors slid open, the same soft hiss she had heard before, inviting her in. Alice's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but the train felt familiar. It felt like it belonged in this place, like it was a part of the darkness, a creature born of the void itself. But there was no other option. She had no choice. The train was all she had now. Swallowing the rising fear in her chest, Alice stepped forward, her feet barely making a sound as she approached the train. Her hands shook as she reached for the door, and the cold metal seemed to hum with a strange energy as she touched it. The instant her fingers brushed against the door, it slid open on its own, an invitation she couldn't refuse. The train was empty just like before. The compartment was dimly lit, and the seats were covered in a fine layer of dust, untouched by time. The air was thick, heavy, and yet there was something about it that made her feel trapped, like the train itself was alive, waiting for her. Without a word, Alice stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her inside once more. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn deeper into something far worse than she could ever imagine. The train began to move again, its wheels creaking as they slid along the tracks. The same eerie hum filled the air, vibrating through her body, making her feel like she was floating, drifting through a world that no longer made sense. The lights above flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the car. Alice looked around, searching for any sign of life, but she was alone. There was no conductor, no other passengers. Only the oppressive silence, broken only by the rhythmic clanking of the train. And then, from the corner of the car, she heard it. A faint rustling sound, soft and almost imperceptible, like something moving in the shadows. Alice's breath caught in her throat as she spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The noise grew louder, closer, and then, slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a woman. Her face was pale, gaunt, her eyes hollow and empty. Her long, dark hair hung around her face like a shroud, and her body was thin, almost skeletal. She was dressed in a tattered gown, the fabric torn and stained with age. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as she moved toward Alice, her eyes fixed on her with an unblinking stare. Alice's body tensed, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move. The woman's presence was suffocating, a heavy weight in the air that made it impossible to breathe. Who are you?" Alice managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. She continued to move closer, her steps silent on the floor, her eyes never leaving Alice. The air around them seemed to grow colder with each passing second, the temperature dropping so rapidly that Alice could see her own breath, thick and misty in the air. The woman stopped just a few feet away from Alice, her empty gaze locked onto her. "You are not supposed to be here." The woman finally spoke, her voice soft, hollow. It was not the voice of a living person. It sounded like it had been torn from the depths of the earth itself, like something that shouldn't exist. Alice swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't belong here. I need to go home. Please, tell me how to leave." The woman's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile, but there was no warmth in it, no compassion, just a deep, terrible void. "You cannot leave, Alice," she said. "The train has already taken you. There is no home for you now. There is no escape." Alice stepped back, her legs shaking beneath her. She reached for the door, but it wouldn't open. It was as if the very train itself had locked her inside, trapping her in this nightmare. "No," she whispered desperately. "Please, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to be here." But the woman just stood there, her smile growing wider, her hollow eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You are here, Alice," she said, her voice laced with dark finality. "And you will stay, forever." With that, the woman faded into the darkness, vanishing as though she had never been there at all. Alice was left standing in the train car, her breath ragged, her body trembling. The train was moving faster now, the lights overhead flickering, the world outside growing darker, more distorted. She could hear the hum of the engine, louder now, a low, constant noise that filled the air and made her bones ache. She was trapped, and there was no way out. Part 8, the last train to nowhere. The train rattled on, its eerie hum now a constant presence that filled Alice's mind, vibrating through her body like a low-frequency pulse. Her hands trembled as she gripped the seat in front of her, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of panic, confusion, and fear. The woman's words echoed in her mind, repeating over and over, each repetition digging deeper into her soul. "You cannot leave, Alice. The train has already taken you. There is no home for you now. There is no escape." The words felt like chains, weighing her down, wrapping themselves around her chest with an iron grip. She had no idea how long she had been on this train, how many stops it had made, or where it was even going. The world outside the windows was a blur, a void, an endless stream of blackness, stretching in every direction with no sign of an end. Her thoughts felt disjointed, scattered, as though they were slipping through her fingers like sand. She couldn't remember when she had first boarded the train, or how she had ended up here. Every moment before now felt like a distant memory, a fading dream that she couldn't hold on to. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the car, and Alice's gaze snapped to the opposite side of the train. She hadn't noticed it before, but now, standing just beyond the door leading to the next compartment, was another figure. This one was different. It wasn't the woman from before, and it wasn't the man, the one who had appeared at the beginning of this nightmare. This figure was tall, impossibly tall, almost too tall for the confines of the train car. Its features were obscured in shadow, its face a void, a blur, something too foreign for Alice to understand. The figure didn't move at first, simply stood there watching her. Alice's breath hitched in her throat. Her body froze, her mind screaming for her to run. But her legs wouldn't respond. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward. It was like a slow, deliberate movement, each step an agonizingly drawn-out moment that stretched the silence between them. Alice could hear the sound of its footsteps, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, each one reverberating in her skull. Her hand shot out, grasping the edge of the seat as though she could steady herself against the force of whatever was about to happen. The figure's head tilted slightly to one side, as though studying her. There was no sound, no words, simply watched. And then, with a movement that defied all logic, the figure stepped through the door. The door didn't open. It didn't slide or creak. The figure simply became part of the door, merging with it in a sickening, unnatural way, like a shadow swallowing the light. Alice gasped, her stomach twisting violently. The door shut behind the figure, sealing it away in the next compartment, and the train's hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through her bones. The air inside the car felt denser now, heavier. It was as though the walls were closing in on her, pushing against her chest, compressing her lungs. Her heart pounded in her ears. The temperature dropped, a cold, biting chill that felt like ice sinking into her skin. She tried to stand, but her body felt weak, like the very energy had been drained from her. The sense of dread that gripped her was overwhelming. Whatever that figure had been, whatever it had done, it had changed the air in the car. It had made everything worse. But before she could make another move, the train lurched. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the car, and Alice's body was thrown forward, slamming against the seat in front of her. The train was slowing down. Her breath caught in her throat. For the briefest moment, there was hope, a fleeting, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, the train was stopping. Maybe she could get off, escape this nightmare. But when she looked out the window, her stomach sank. Outside was still nothing. Only the same black void, the same unending nothingness. The train didn't stop. It didn't pull into a station. It just slowed, and then began to crawl forward again, like it was gathering itself, pulling her deeper into whatever nightmare she was caught in. And then, through the thick fog of her fear, a new sound reached her ears. Faint at first, but unmistakable, the sound of a voice calling her name. Alice! Her name echoed through the empty car, drifting on the stale air, distant and muffled. Alice, come closer. The voice wasn't the same as the woman's. It wasn't the man's. It was softer, but no less chilling. The words seemed to crawl beneath her skin, creeping into her thoughts, wrapping around her heart like a vice. They weren't just in the air. They were inside her mind, vibrating through her bones. Alice! She couldn't resist. Slowly, against her better judgment, Alice stood up. Her legs were shaky beneath her, but she forced herself to walk, one step at a time, toward the source of the voice. It seemed to be coming from the far end of the train car, from the direction of the door that had opened earlier, the one the tall figure had walked through. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, the voice spoke again, closer this time, clearer. Alice, you've made it this far, but you're not done yet. Her breath hitched. She pulled her hand back, but the door creaked open of its own accord. The darkness beyond the door stretched out like an endless tunnel, a void so deep she could feel it pulling her in. Without thinking, without another word, Alice stepped through the door. The next compartment was like nothing she had ever seen before. It was a room, but not a normal room. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, and the air smelled like decay, like something long abandoned. But the strangest thing was the furniture. The chairs were turned backward, their backs facing the walls. The tables were upturned, their legs twisted and bent at unnatural angles. It was as if someone had been here before her, preparing this place for something or someone. And in the center of the room stood a mirror. It was tall, framed in dark wood, with intricate carvings etched into the edges. But what disturbed Alice most were the reflections. The mirror was full of people. They weren't ordinary people. They were distorted, twisted, faces warped into grotesque shapes, their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes were wide, filled with a terror Alice couldn't fathom. But one face stood out among them all, her own. Alice's reflection stared back at her, her face contorted in terror. But it wasn't just her reflection. It was like she was looking into a mirror of herself, another version of her, twisted and deformed. The reflection of Alice in the mirror moved. It reached out, its hand pressing against the glass, just inches from Alice's own hand. "Alice," the reflection whispered, "come to me." Part 10, The Last Train to Nowhere. The moment Alice crossed the threshold of the door, the world shattered. Everything, sound, light, and reality itself, seemed to collapse inward, folding around her like a page being crumpled into a ball. She felt herself falling, spiraling through a dark tunnel, as though time and space had ceased to exist. Her limbs flailed uselessly in the void, and her body was weightless, disconnected from anything solid or real. For what felt like an eternity, she fell, and then, without warning, the world around her snapped back into focus. Alice's feet hit solid ground with a thud, and she gasped for air, her heart racing in her chest. She stumbled, catching herself against a wall, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. The ground beneath her was firm, unyielding, and the air smelled fresh, clean, even far different from the oppressive atmosphere she had been suffocating in on the train. Her surroundings were unfamiliar. She was no longer in the train car. She was standing in what appeared to be a small, dimly lit room. The walls were made of smooth stone, and the faint glow of light filtered through the cracks in the rock. There were no windows, no doors, just the cold, hard stone stretching out in every direction. The room was empty, save for a single object lying in the center. A mirror, but this was no ordinary mirror. Its frame was ornate, intricate, carved from dark wood that seemed to shimmer with an eerie, otherworldly light. The surface of the mirror, unlike any she had seen before, rippled as though it were alive, its reflection constantly shifting, like the water in a still pond disturbed by an unseen force. Alice's breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be another trick, another part of the nightmare. She had to leave. She had to wake up. But her body refused to obey. She couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, staring at the mirror with a mix of terror and fascination. She could feel the pull of it, like a gravitational force drawing her in, pushing her forward, urging her to look deeper. Slowly, unwillingly, Alice took a step toward the mirror. Her feet moved of their own accord, each step heavier than the last, as though the weight of the room itself was pressing down on her. When she finally reached the mirror, her reflection did not meet her gaze immediately. Instead, the surface rippled again, like water disturbed by the slightest breeze, and for a moment, she saw something else. It wasn't her. It was another version of herself. But this one was different. Her face was pale, hollow, her eyes dark pits of nothingness. The woman in the reflection was smiling, a cruel, twisted grin that stretched too wide, too unnaturally, like it was stitched onto her face. "Do you see it, Alice?" The figure in the mirror whispered, its voice distorted, echoing in her ears. It wasn't her voice. It was something darker, something ancient. You've been running for so long, but it was always this way. You are lost, and you will always be. Alice's stomach lurched. This wasn't just a reflection of herself. It was something more, something other, part of her, but also something separate. A shadow, perhaps. No, Alice gasped, stepping back, but her feet seemed glued to the floor. This isn't real. You're not me. You're not. But the figure in the mirror only smiled wider, its face distorting further, becoming more grotesque, more inhuman. I am you, it said softly, its voice full of venom. And I have always been. The reflection stepped forward, its hand pressing against the surface of the mirror. The image rippled, like a stone thrown into a pond, and the hand reached through the glass, extending toward Alice. Alice's eyes widened in horror as the hand drew closer, its fingers long and spindly, reaching through the mirror as though the very glass itself were made of liquid. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, paralyzed by the sight before her. The hand was inches from her face now. Alice? The reflection whispered again, its voice low and dark. You belong to me now. In that moment, Alice's body finally moved. With a frantic, desperate push, she slammed her hand against the surface of the mirror, trying to break the connection, to shatter the reflection that seemed to be pulling her into its depths. But it was too late. The mirror cracked with a deafening sound, the sharp shards splitting outward in all directions. Alice screamed as she fell back, her body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. For a moment, the world went silent. Then, a terrible cracking sound filled the room, louder than anything she had ever heard, and the cracks in the mirror seemed to spread, engulfing the reflection entirely. The figure in the glass screamed, its distorted face contorting in agony as it vanished into the broken shards. And then the room began to change. The walls trembled, the stone shifting and cracking as if something beneath the surface were alive, trying to break free. Alice's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pushed herself up, her legs shaky beneath her, but the ground beneath her was shaking violently now, the stones around her cracking open. The room was collapsing, the walls split apart, and the floor beneath her feet crumbled away, revealing a deep, yawning chasm. Alice looked down, her stomach turning, and for the first time she understood. The world she had been in, this twisted train, this nightmare, was crumbling away. It was falling apart, and she was falling with it. She reached out, desperately grabbing at the nearest stone, but the ground continued to give way beneath her. The darkness below beckoned, an endless abyss that seemed to consume everything in its path. And then, just as her fingers slipped from the stone, just as the last bit of solid ground disappeared beneath her feet, a voice rang out in the darkness. Alice, wake up. It was soft, distant, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. But it was a voice she recognized. The voice was hers. The world around her stopped. The air stilled. And in the stillness, Alice realized what had happened. She had been running, fleeing from herself, from the truth. She had thought she was escaping the nightmare, but all this time, she had been a part of it. She had always been a part of it. The last train to nowhere had been taking her not away from something, but to something. And now she had reached the end, the final destination. And as the darkness swallowed her, she finally understood. It wasn't the train that had trapped her. It had been herself all along. Everything stopped. The world that had been spinning around Alice, the endless train, the collapsing mirrors, the terrifying reflection of herself, came to a sudden halt. Her body felt weightless, her mind struggling to catch up with the absence of movement. The air around her was still, oppressive, like the atmosphere had turned thick, saturated with the weight of everything that had happened. She was no longer falling. The chasm that had once yawned beneath her feet, the darkness that seemed to consume the very essence of her being, was gone. The world she had known, the twisted, surreal nightmare she had been trapped in, had faded, leaving behind nothing but an endless, quiet void. For a moment, she wondered if this was it, if this was the end. The last train to nowhere had carried her to this place. Had she reached the final station? Or was this just another part of the journey? Another warped illusion waiting to twist and distort her reality? Her chest heaved as she tried to steady her breath. Her fingers flexed against the cold stone beneath her, and she realized, for the first time in what felt like forever, that she was standing again. Her body was solid, no longer suspended in midair or slipping into the abyss. The ground beneath her was real, firm. It wasn't like before. The air felt different, crisp, clean. For the first time, there was a quietness to everything. No rattle of the train, no oppressive hum in the background. Just silence. Deep, all-encompassing silence. Alice stood in the center of a vast, open space. The walls of stone that had once closed in around her had vanished, leaving her standing in a field of light. It was a place unlike anything she had ever seen before. The sky above her was impossibly blue, stretching endlessly in every direction. The horizon seemed to go on forever, the light soft and warm, casting long shadows on the ground. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat. The world before her was serene, peaceful even. There were no signs of the darkness she had escaped from, no shadows of monsters or reflections to haunt her. No train tracks, no station, no twisted mirror. This was real, or at least it felt real. She looked down at her hands. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could see her own skin, her fingers, the familiar markings that made her her. She wasn't distorted. She wasn't a reflection. She was just Alice. The stillness was broken only by the soft sound of wind rustling through grass. She felt the earth beneath her feet, the coolness of the air against her skin. Everything was calm, almost too calm, like the world was waiting for something to happen, or perhaps waiting for her to understand. But what was this place? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was it a dream? Was she still trapped in the nightmare of the train? Was this just another layer of illusion? Another trick designed to trap her further? She took a tentative step forward, and then another, and another. The landscape stretched out before her, unending and beautiful. It was too beautiful, too perfect. She stopped walking and looked around again. There were no other people, no signs of life, just the field, the sky, the soft breeze, and her. The silence was profound, almost suffocating in its emptiness. No footsteps, no movement except for the grass gently swaying in the wind. She felt like she had entered another world, one that was not part of her reality, where the rules were different, where time might not exist, where there was nothing to fight, nothing to escape from. No, this can't be real. Her mind was still reeling. She couldn't trust this place. She couldn't trust her own senses. Alice! The voice pierced through the stillness like a knife through the air. It wasn't the deep, growling voice she had heard in the train or the echo of her reflection. It was soft, gentle, almost familiar. She turned toward the sound of the voice, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the distance, standing in the field of light, was a figure. At first, she couldn't make out the details. The figure was hazy, shifting like an apparition, its form barely visible against the brightness of the sky. As the figure stepped forward, the haze cleared, and Alice's heart skipped a beat. It was her own self standing there, but not quite the same. This version of Alice was older, worn with the passage of time. Her hair was streaked with silver, and there was a depth in her eyes, a wisdom that Alice had never seen before. She was calm, serene, as though she had already understood something that Alice had yet to grasp. Her older self smiled softly, a peaceful, knowing smile that seemed to carry a weight of understanding. "You've come a long way, Alice," the older version of her said, her voice like a whisper in the wind. "But you've never left." Alice's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't comprehend it. She couldn't understand why or how she was seeing herself in this strange, otherworldly place. "What do you mean?" Alice whispered, her voice hoarse from the emotions surging within her. "How can this be real? How can you be real?" The older version of herself took a step closer, the grass bending beneath her feet. "I am you, Alice," she said softly. "I am the part of you that has always known the truth." The part of you that you've been running from. Alice's mind reeled. The truth? She repeated. What truth? What are you talking about? You've been running from yourself? The older Alice said, her voice full of gentle sadness. The train, the mirror, the fear. You've been running from the part of you that has always existed. The part of you that's been trapped in the cycle. In the train. In the mirrors. In your own mind. Alice shook her head, her chest tightening. No, that can't be right. I've been trying to escape. I can't be part of that nightmare. I can't be that. You are Alice? The older Alice said gently, her eyes full of empathy. You've always been a part of it. Because it's a part of you. Alice stumbled backward, her hands shaking. The words echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. I don't understand. I don't want this. I don't want to be trapped anymore. The older Alice nodded slowly. You don't have to be trapped anymore, she said softly. You've already broken free. But it's not what you think. You didn't escape the train, Alice. You stopped running. You stopped trying to outrun yourself. Alice's heart ached. The words hit her like a punch in the gut. Stopped running? She had tried to outrun her fears, her past, the things that haunted her. She had tried to leave the nightmare behind, but now, standing before her, was the truth she had been avoiding. You are the train, Alice, the older version of herself whispered. The journey, the fear, the escape, they're all parts of you. But now you can choose. You can choose to let go, or you can continue running, forever lost. Alice stared at the woman who was, in a way, her. The realization was overwhelming. Everything she had been through, the train, the reflections, the constant cycle of fear, had been a reflection of her own struggles. She had been trying to run from herself, but all this time, the answer had been within her reach. She could feel the weight of her past, the fear, the anger, the shame, clinging to her, dragging her down. But now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of something else, a spark of understanding. The fear wasn't her. It didn't define her. She could choose to break free. The older Alice smiled softly, her eyes full of love and understanding. The light that had engulfed Alice's surroundings slowly dimmed, leaving behind a soft, almost ethereal glow. For a moment, she stood in the quiet peace of this new space, her heart still racing as the reality of what she had just encountered began to sink in. The older version of herself, the reflection, the part of her that had been both her shadow and her guide, had offered her a choice that would define the rest of her existence. But Alice felt no sense of fear now, no terror. There was only an overwhelming feeling of calm, as if the years of running from herself had finally come to an end. She had no idea where she was, or what would come next, but for the first time, she felt at peace with the unknown. She took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs, the coolness soothing her rattled nerves. The fields around her stretched out in every direction, the sky still impossibly blue, the horizon stretching far and wide, offering endless possibilities. She looked down at the ground beneath her feet, solid, real, and unmoving, and for a fleeting moment, the sensation of being grounded, truly grounded, flooded her entire being. Then, as if responding to some unspoken thought, the ground shifted beneath her, just slightly. The grass around her began to sway, not from the wind, but as if the earth itself was reacting to her presence. Slowly, the space began to morph, folding like paper, bending into new shapes that took form in front of her eyes. The field started to twist, revealing paths that wound through rolling hills, roads that led into the distance. There were no harsh edges, no lines, just the fluid, gentle transition of one scene into another. A forest appeared to her left, trees stretching high, their branches reaching like welcoming arms, and beyond that, the glint of water, perhaps a river or a lake. The voice of the older Alice echoed in her mind again. You have stopped running, Alice. You can choose where to go now. Alice took a tentative step forward. Her feet sank slightly into the soft earth, and she felt herself drawn toward the distant forest. It seemed inviting, yet mysterious, like a place where answers might lie, answers that had eluded her all this time. As she walked, She felt a strange sensation in her chest, as if something inside her was shifting, opening. She could still feel the pull of the last train, the ghost of it lingering in her memories, the hum of the wheels on the tracks, the rattling of the train car. But it was quieter now, distant. No longer the all-consuming force it had once been. She was no longer a passenger in her own life. She was no longer caught in the loop of fear and escape. The forest grew denser as she continued walking. The trees towered above her, their trunks thick with age, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. A golden light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Alice felt drawn to the heart of the forest, her steps slow but purposeful. She reached a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was a large ancient oak tree. Its trunk was gnarled and twisted, its roots sprawling across the ground like the fingers of some great, slumbering giant. The tree was majestic, its branches stretching out in all directions, covered in thick, green leaves that shimmered with life. Alice felt something stir inside her, a deep, primal connection to the tree. She walked closer, her hand reaching out to touch the rough bark. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a surge of warmth spread through her body, and she gasped as a vision overtook her. She was no longer standing in the clearing. She was standing at the edge of the train station, the one where she had first stepped onto the train. The sky above was heavy with storm clouds, the wind howling through the trees. She could hear the sound of the train's whistle, distant but unmistakable. But it was different now. The train no longer beckoned to her, no longer held the same dark allure. It stood there waiting, but it felt like an echo, something that no longer had power over her. As Alice looked around, she saw the faces of the people she had encountered on her journey. The woman in the mirror, the man in the shadows, the passengers she had never truly met. They were all there, standing in the station, waiting. But this time, they didn't look afraid. They didn't look lost. They looked free. They were no longer trapped in the same cycle of fear and escape that Alice had once been a part of. They were whole, at peace with themselves. "You see, Alice?" The voice of the older version of herself echoed softly in her mind. "You were never meant to stay on that train. The journey was never the destination. It was always about the choices you make, the steps you take." Alice blinked, the vision of the station fading as quickly as it had come. She was back in the clearing, her hand still resting on the oak tree. The air around her was calm, and for the first time, she realized that she no longer felt the weight of the train, the mirror, the fear. She was free. Her heart swelled with a deep sense of gratitude, of understanding. She had spent so long running, trying to escape, trying to outrun the part of herself that she feared. But now she could see the truth. She had never needed to escape. The only way out had been through accepting who she was, through facing the darkness within and letting it go. "Thank you," Alice whispered, her voice full of awe and humility. She looked up at the tree, as if it could hear her, as if it could understand, as if, in some way, it had always known. For a moment, the world around her seemed to hold its breath. The breeze stilled, the leaves stopped rustling, and time itself seemed to pause. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the stillness was broken. A soft, melodic sound floated through the air, a sound that Alice hadn't heard in so long. It was the sound of a train's whistle, but this time it didn't fill her with fear. It was not the haunting sound of the last train, but something else. A call, a reminder. The wind shifted, and the path before her seemed to open up. The train station was gone now, replaced by the endless road ahead, winding through the world she had yet to explore. The train was no longer a destination. It was just another part of her past, a chapter she had closed. And now, there were new roads to walk, new choices to make, and new journeys to embark on. Alice took a deep breath and took her first step. As Alice walked forward, the world around her seemed to open up, not just in a physical sense, but in a deeper, more profound way. Each step she took on the path that stretched before her felt lighter than the last, as though the weight of her past had been left behind with each movement. The landscape was vast, stretching out into an expanse of green fields, rolling hills, and wide skies that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could hear the distant chirping of birds, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional hum of life. It was the kind of peace she had always longed for but had never truly experienced until now. With each passing moment, Alice felt a sense of freedom. Freedom from the chains of the train, the haunting mirrors, the fear, and the darkness. She no longer had to outrun herself. She could simply be, and the realization was both humbling and empowering. But the path before her was not just one of tranquility. It was a path of choice, a road that twisted and turned in ways she could not yet understand. There were so many directions, so many possibilities, and for a moment, Alice felt a twinge of uncertainty. The world was open to her now, but she had to choose where to go. She stopped for a moment, taking in the vastness of it all. There were no signs to guide her, no markers, no obvious path. The road before her split into several smaller paths, each one leading in a different direction. Some led through the forest, others across wide meadows, and some disappeared into distant mountains in the distance. Every path seemed to hold a mystery, a promise of something new, but there was no way of knowing which one was the right one. A gentle breeze brushed against her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind wash over her. She was no longer trapped by the weight of fear, no longer bound by the suffocating, oppressive force of the train. She was free, but where would she go? Alice! The voice echoed again, soft, familiar. It wasn't the older version of herself this time, but something different, something distant, yet close. She opened her eyes to see a figure standing at the edge of one of the paths, bathed in a warm light that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath them. The figure was still, but there was something inviting in the way they stood, as if waiting for Alice to approach. Alice stepped toward the figure, her feet moving instinctively, as though the very ground beneath her was guiding her. As she came closer, the figure became clearer. A person, a woman, with long flowing hair that seemed to shimmer in the light. She wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze, and her eyes shone with a warmth that made Alice feel calm, as though she were stepping into the embrace of a long-lost friend. "Who are you?" Alice asked softly, her voice a whisper in the quiet air. The woman smiled, her gaze soft and understanding. "I am you, Alice, the part of you that you've yet to find." Alice's breath caught in her chest. "But I thought I found myself. I thought I understood." "You have found a part of yourself, yes, but there are many parts of you, many pieces that have yet to come together. The journey you've taken has led you to this point, but it's not the end." The woman stepped closer, her presence warm and inviting. "The road ahead is yours to choose, but it will not be without its challenges. You will need all the parts of yourself, your strength, your vulnerability, your courage, and your doubts. They are all pieces of who you are, and they will guide you." Alice looked down at the ground, the weight of her words sinking in. She had thought that escaping the train, leaving behind the fear and the darkness, was the end. But now, standing before this version of herself, she realized that this was only the beginning. The world was open to her, but there was still so much more to understand, so much more to learn. "Am I ready?" Alice asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Am I ready for what's next?" The woman smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to walk." Alice's heart stirred with a quiet understanding. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know exactly where the path would lead. She just had to keep walking one step at a time. The rest would unfold in its own time. The woman extended her hand toward Alice, a gesture of both invitation and reassurance. "Come with me, Alice. Let me show you the way." Alice hesitated for a moment, but something deep inside her, the same force that had carried her through her darkest hours, urged her forward. She reached out, her hand meeting the woman's with a sense of peace, of calm, of knowing. As their hands touched, the world around them seemed to shift, and Alice's surroundings blurred. The path before her seemed to widen, the trees and fields stretching out into a horizon that she could no longer see. The light grew brighter, and for the first time, Alice felt as though she were truly stepping into something new, a world without fear, without the constraints of the past. She was free not because the world was without challenge, but because she was no longer afraid of facing it. Together, they began to walk, side by side, down the path ahead. The air was filled with the sound of birds singing, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The world was alive, full of possibility. Every step was a step toward something new, something undefined, but no longer terrifying. The journey had not ended with the last train. It had only just begun, and Alice, for the first time, was ready. The world was vast, more expansive than Alice had ever imagined. It stretched out in every direction, and yet, for the first time, she felt no sense of fear about it, no sense of dread. The land before her was open and filled with possibilities, endless opportunities to explore, to learn, to grow. The old, familiar weight of the train and the dark, endless journey were gone, replaced by a new kind of freedom. But with that freedom came the vast uncertainty of what lay ahead. Alice continued walking, her hand still lightly resting in the woman's, her other self's warm grasp. As they moved forward, the world around them shifted gently. The fields they walked through were filled with colors Alice had never seen before, hues of gold, purple, and green, stretching out like an artist's palette. The sky above was so clear and bright that it almost seemed unreal. Every breath of air was clean and crisp, filled with the scent of new life, of blooming flowers and earth. Alice wasn't sure how long they had been walking, but it felt like time had lost its meaning here. The rhythmic pace of her steps, the soft sounds of nature around her, the presence of the woman at her side. It was all soothing, the kind of soothing that allowed her to finally drop the tension that had followed her for so long. The woman, or rather, the version of herself who now walked beside her, spoke occasionally but not often. Her words weren't full of instructions or grand wisdom. They were simple, comforting truths. Each phrase felt like a key unlocking a door that Alice didn't even realize she had been too afraid to open. "You've learned so much already?" the woman said one day as they paused by a bubbling stream. Alice noticed that the woman's voice no longer held the heaviness it once had. "But the truth is, you don't need to know everything to move forward. You just need to trust yourself." Alice nodded, looking out over the water. The clear stream seemed to reflect the sky above, a perfect mirror. But unlike the mirror she had seen in the train, the one that had once terrified her, this reflection felt like a place of understanding. She could look into the water and see herself, but it wasn't the distorted version of her past fears. This was her in the present, alive, real, and whole. "I'm afraid," Alice admitted, her voice soft. "I don't know what's ahead. I don't know if I'll be able to face whatever comes next." The woman smiled, her face calm and understanding. "It's okay to be afraid. Fear doesn't define you, Alice. You've always had it, but you've never let it control you. And you don't have to face the future alone. You have yourself. You have me." She paused, her gaze far away for a moment before turning back to Alice. "And that's enough." Alice's chest tightened as a wave of emotion washed over her. The woman, this version of her, was right. She had always been afraid. Afraid of what she might find in herself. Afraid of the past. Afraid of the unknown. But here, in this place, there was no need to be afraid anymore. It wasn't just about escaping the train or the cycle of fear. It was about understanding that she was no longer trapped in the stories she had told herself. She was free, and freedom was something she hadn't truly embraced before. "Thank you," Alice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to see that I've been holding myself back." The woman nodded. "We all do. We've all been there. But you can't keep holding yourself back anymore. You've stepped off the train, Alice. Now you have to step into your life." They resumed walking, the sound of the stream gently filling the air. The path in front of them was clear, though Alice knew that nothing would stay the same forever. Life was change, movement, growth. But that didn't scare her anymore. She could face it. After what felt like hours, the landscape began to shift again. The rolling hills gave way to a vast, open plain, a meadow that seemed to stretch out to the horizon. In the distance, she could see a tall mountain range rising against the sky. The woman led Alice toward the meadow, where a small wooden cabin sat nestled against the side of a hill. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney, and Alice could smell the faint scent of cooking food on the breeze. "This is where you can rest for now," the woman said, gesturing toward the cabin. "You're free, Alice. You've made it this far, but you can't always be on the move. Sometimes you have to take time to rest and reflect. Only then can you see the path more clearly." Alice looked at the cabin, the simple structure sitting peacefully amidst the vastness of the land. It was a place of warmth, of refuge, a place where she could pause and take stock of everything she had learned, everything she had gone through. She could feel the gentle pull toward it, the invitation to settle in for a while, to gather her strength before moving forward. "I'm ready," Alice said, her voice steady and firm. The woman smiled, and as Alice walked toward the cabin, she felt a sense of deep relief settle in her chest. It wasn't that she had all the answers or that everything was suddenly clear, but the uncertainty didn't feel so daunting anymore. The fears that had once paralyzed her were fading into the background, replaced by a sense of acceptance and understanding. And that was enough. The cabin was warm inside, a fire crackling in the hearth. Alice sank into the chair near the fire, letting the warmth seep into her bones. The woman, her other self, sat across from her, the same peaceful smile on her face. "You've been through so much," the woman said. "But you've come so far, Alice, and you will go even further. You have everything you need inside you. You always have." Alice nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. The woman's words weren't just comforting. They were true. She had everything she needed. She had herself. The sound of the fire crackling was the only noise in the room, but it was the perfect kind of silence, the kind that was not deafening but affirming. She could hear the pulse of her own thoughts, steady and calming, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't afraid. As the night settled around them, Alice took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment fill her. She didn't know what the future held, or what paths lay ahead, but she didn't need to know. She was no longer running from anything. She was free, and that was enough. Days passed in the quiet cabin, and Alice found herself waking up each morning to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the wooden walls. The fire in the hearth crackled, the air was crisp, and the land outside the window stretched endlessly in every direction. The cabin became a place of refuge, a sanctuary where Alice could rest, reflect, and finally begin to understand what she had truly been searching for all along. The woman, the older version of herself, remained a constant presence, but not in the way Alice had expected. She wasn't a guide or a mentor anymore. She was a part of Alice, a reflection of all the wisdom and strength that had been buried deep within her. The woman's presence was like a steadying hand on her shoulder, a quiet reminder that Alice had the power to face whatever lay ahead. But the woman no longer needed to speak. Alice had learned what she needed to learn. She was ready. One morning, as Alice stood by the window, watching the mist rise off the meadows, a sudden realization hit her. She wasn't bound to this place anymore. The train, the mirrors, the darkness, it had all been a part of her past. A journey she had taken, a journey that had forced her to face her fears and accept herself. But now she was free. She turned away from the window, the warm light of the cabin spilling across her face. She could hear the faint sound of birds in the distance, the rustling of the wind in the trees, the soft hum of life. She knew what she had to do. The older Alice, her other self, was sitting by the fire, her eyes closed in peaceful reflection. The moment Alice stepped toward her, the woman opened her eyes and smiled, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. "You know, don't you?" the woman said softly, her voice as comforting as it had always been. Alice nodded. "I'm ready to go. It's time." The woman's smile deepened. "I know. You've learned what you needed to. The next part of your journey is yours alone. You've stopped running, Alice. You've accepted what is, and now you can move forward." Alice felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't sadness, it was something else. Gratitude, understanding, acceptance. The woman, her other self, had been a mirror, a guide, a reminder of the parts of herself Alice had forgotten. But now the mirror had shattered. The journey she had been on, the one that had led her through fear and darkness, was over, and she was no longer afraid. "I'll never forget this," Alice said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I'll carry it with me, all of it." The woman nodded, standing up and walking toward Alice. They stood face to face, eyes locked, and for the first time, Alice saw herself without fear. She saw not just the broken parts, but the strength that had always been within her, waiting to be acknowledged. "You've always been enough, Alice," the woman said, her voice full of warmth. "And you always will be." And with that, the older Alice slowly faded, her form dissolving into the soft light that filled the cabin. The moment she was gone, Alice felt the weight of her presence still lingering, like the gentle warmth of a memory. It wasn't a loss, it was a completion. She was no longer two separate parts of herself. She was whole. Alice turned back toward the door, her hand resting on the worn wood. She could feel the path before her, the road ahead, stretching into the unknown. But this time she was not afraid. She didn't need to know every step. She didn't need to see the entire journey. All she needed to do was move forward. The door creaked open, and Alice stepped outside. The land before her was still vast, filled with possibilities. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, grounding her to the earth beneath her feet. She could feel the pulse of life, the hum of the world that had been waiting for her to step into it. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like she belonged here, in the world, in her life. With one last glance at the cabin, Alice began walking forward. The road ahead was hers to choose. There were no more trains, no more mirrors, no more running. There was only the next step, and the next, and for the first time she knew she was ready. The end.